How will Ukraine take back Crimea? In a military way, by launching an offensive like the Kherson direction, or by political means, by calling the return of the peninsula the main condition for a truce? Which prospects does Kyiv see and what does the West advise? The answers to these questions are more than essential, but now they are subject to active discussions. After all, the First Parliamentary Summit of the Crimea Platform was held in Zagreb, Croatia. Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of US House of Representatives, joined it in person, an event one cannot just ignore. What forecasts were voiced? What kind of advice did Western partners give? I'm Alexey Matsuka. Let's us figure it out. Let's be honest, the return of Crimea after 9 years of annexation is rather challenging. Official Kyiv and President Zelensky frankly recognize it. Most likely, Ukraine will need some international support and international experience here. The participants of the Crimea Platform discuss these issues. We'll talk about the statements of its participants and guests separately. First, let's figure it out what should precede this reintegration. The military way, no matter how unrealistic it might seem in February 2022, is currently called one of the possible options. Moreover, Ukraine is also liberating its other territories. In terms of military strategy, Ukraine's counter-offensive in the southern direction may just have a logical result, de-occupying Crimea. Will it happen? It depends on several factors. After all, hostilities continue not only in the Kherson direction, but also in Donbass, and Russia might be just using the threat of the invasion from the territory of Belarus as a lever to pull back Ukraine troops and eliminate the risk of losing Crimea. Secondly, the success of the military scenario is directly related to the supply of Western weapons. Ukrainian Minister of Defense stated this.
We will liberate all our territories, including Crimea. Crimea is a strategic goal of Kyiv because it's Ukrainian territory. Alexei Reznikov, Minister of Defense of Ukraine.
Kirill Budanov, Chief of the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine, even called some possible dates.
In winter, the war will largely subside. And after the winter, the end of this conflict will begin by reaching the administrative borders as of 1991. Kirill Budanov, Chief of the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine.
The Telegraph newspaper has published the US forecast. The Pentagon considers the occupation of Crimea to be a probable scenario provided that the counteroffensive of the armed forces of Ukraine continues.
Russia is not able to defend its key positions, and if Ukraine is successful in its goal of tracking back Kherson, there is a possibility that it will eventually be able to recapture Crimea, the Telegraph newspaper.
Ramstein format has become a traditional place to discuss military scenarios, but the Crimea platform has become a political platform. The representatives of parliaments from 50 countries flocked to the Croatian capital to join a new format. It's not by chance that Zagreb is hosting the Crimea platform, not only due to security reasons Kyiv suffers from the air raids, but also because Croatia has great experience in military de-occupation and reintegration of the territory.
We in Croatia know what aggression is, what force and denial of the right to exist are. We value the Ukrainian struggle for freedom, truce, and democracy. To stand with Ukraine is a morally, legally, and civilizationally correct act. Andrei Plenković, Prime Minister of Croatia.
Why is this discussion so relevant now? Foreign politicians admitted that in 2014 the West didn't dare react to the annexation of Crimea as harshly as possible, hoping to appease Putin.
The illegal annexation of the peninsula in 2014 should be a wake-up call. Unfortunately, many of us have not woken up. We began to dream of a peaceful conclusion. Putin was again invited to a meeting of prestigious international organizations. Markéta Pekarová-Adamová, Speaker of the Chamber of Deputies of the Czech Parliament.
They hoped that Moscow would stop. And now they understand that this silence resulted in a large-scale war. Nancy Pelosi spoke about this.
Crimea is Ukraine. Unfortunately, we know that Russia's actions in Crimea are only one dimension of a comprehensive attack on Ukraine and democracy. Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the United States House of Representatives.
Participants of the Zagreb meeting also talked about how other world practices of reintegration, parallels with Kherson and Crimea, suggest themselves. Here is Croatia's experience. The Croatian army captured the administrative center of Serbian Krajina, the city of Knin. After that, 200,000 local Serbs fled the territory. Croatia wanted to return the remaining territory peacefully and offered negotiations. Serbian regular units were already standing there and the area was densely populated. It could lead to human losses. Therefore, they agreed to send a peacekeeping mission and a UN transitional administration to Slavonia, when international officials led all authorities. It lasted for a year, then the mandate was extended for another year. It looks very similar to what they could implement now. Western participants of the Crimea Platform assure that now Ukraine has a unique window of opportunities to implement this. They also discussed the case of the Sinai Peninsula on the sidelines of the Zagreb meetings as a possible example for Ukraine. The Sinai Peninsula was occupied by Israel during the war with Egypt. In 1967, Egypt tried to regain its territories by military means twice, but without a success. The parties signed a peace treaty mediated by the United States. It provided for the withdrawal of troops and the restoration of the internationally recognized border. Harsh economic sanctions, the refusal of Arab oil-producing countries to sell out oil to Israel and countries that supported the annexation became complicity factors for Israel. Here is another parallel with Crimea. After the occupation, the Sinai Peninsula was settled by migrants from Israel. The Kremlin has resettled Russians to Crimea in order to have a loyal population. Here is what Rifat Chubarov said about that.
Moscow is aware that sooner or later it will leave Crimea, and this 500,000, some experts say about 1 million Russian citizens who have settled in Crimea, this would be Russia's presence after Russian troops leave Crimea, and we cannot agree with this. Rifat Chubarov, chairman of the Crimean Tatar Majlis.
Whatever scenario Ukraine chooses over time, a political component is also crucial in order for it to be realized practically. In any case, we need broad support from foreign partners, and this is not only about the weapons that Ukraine asks for, but also about diplomacy and sanctions. In other words, pressure on Russia, and we've already heard such promises.
We hold meetings in different parliaments every day. We have signed a memorandum of understanding. We are creating projects to increase financial, military, social, and humanitarian support. It's an ongoing process. It's not a one-day job. We must put sanctions on Russia and support Ukraine every day. Otman Karas, First Vice President of the European Parliament.
Crimea Platform participants underline that the military campaign of Ukraine and the deoccupation plan are not the same thing. The occupation cannot take place in war conditions. It should be conducted without framework of a peacekeeping mission, with a transitional period for the withdrawal of Russian troops. And at the same time, Ukraine should have a clear plan, first of all, for the inhabitants of the peninsula. It's important to make it clear which status will Crimea obtain when it returns to Ukrainian jurisdiction. Crimean residents should understand that will happen next. Then further process will become less painful for them. And we already hear some ideas. For instance, let's listen to what Tamila Tasheva says.
We will bring to justice top officials who contributed to the establishment of the occupation regime on the territory of the Crimean Peninsula. Some of the people who did not violate, and this is the majority of people living on the territory of Peninsula who did not commit war crimes. Of course, these people have nothing to fear in this respect. Tamila Tasheva, presidential representative of Ukraine in Crimea.
Interestingly, the Crimea Platform discussions went beyond the Crimea issue. The participants stated that Russia's war against Ukraine would provoke further collapse of the Soviet Union, and Moscow's decisions to start aggression only accelerated this process. For example, President Zelensky voiced the message that the liberation of Crimea would be an important signal for all post-Soviet countries.
We should make this format of ours, the format of the Crimea Platform, a starting point for other humanitarian and diplomatic platforms that will promote the deoccupation of other territories that were once enslaved, from Transnistria and Abkhazia to the northern territories. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine.
Failures on the battlefield, huge casualties and dissatisfaction with the mobilization can cause turbulence within Russia itself. The liberation of Kherson may trigger different groups of influence. They may try to negotiate with Kyiv, Brussels, Washington in order to avoid complete defeat in the war. There is even a version that the current story with the dirty bomb is Russia's attempt to find a way out of the war through negotiations. Allegedly, the aim is to provoke discussions of the possible war ending, but Kyiv has a clear position here: no negotiations about Ukraine without Ukraine, and Washington voiced this again. The final of this war in the negotiations should be decided not by the United States and Russia, but Kyiv and Moscow.
Nobody wants to see this war ended more than our Ukrainian partners. Our Ukrainian partners have similarly said that this war will only end through diplomacy and dialogue. We have not seen any indications from the Russians that they are prepared to engage in that diplomacy and dialogue. This is going to be diplomacy that our Ukrainian partners are going to have to lead. They are going to have to determine the contours of this diplomacy, what any negotiation will look like. Ned Price, the U.S. State Department spokesperson.
Here are the options discussed: increasing economic sanctions against Russia in order to force it to negotiate on the status of Crimea, considering the status of Crimea in the broader context of unrecognized territories, including Moldova and Georgia, using a large-scale diplomatic resources like the Crimea Platform. Surprisingly, the meeting of ombudsmen will become the next format of communication within the Crimea Platform. What will they adopt, and will this meeting unblock the exchange of prisoners of war? Follow our next episode to discover it. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.